Our next panel is called Long Bridging Toward Democracy and Belonging, an us versus them mindset in leading us toward dehumanization of each other, which, as we talked about this morning, fuels violence, wars, and the erosion of democratic values. Building the bigger we will require new tools and infrastructures that will change our modes of being and working. That's what this next panel is going to discuss. So it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this conversation, Professor Yuna Blajer de la Garza. Professor de la Garza teaches political theory at Loyola University, Chicago. You're going to want to create a Google alert for her name because you do not want to miss the conversation around her current book, A House is Not a Home, Citizenship and Belonging in Contemporary Democracies. This book, like much of her work, focuses on the citizen who does not belong as a figure that poses a puzzle for egalitarian politics not properly accounted for by current democratic theory. Born and raised in Mexico City, much of her work was focused on Mexico. She has also written about France and the US. She studies inequalities in democracies by examining how formal institutions are mistranslated and appropriated into everyday practices and norms, and grounds her theoretical arguments drawing on the politics of everyday life. Yuna and your panel, please welcome to the Othering and Belonging 2024 stage. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on this panel on long bridges towards democracy and belonging. I am Yuna Blajer de la Garza, and it is no exaggeration to say that I'm truly, really delighted to be here, and it's really an honor to be part of this conference, especially with such wonderful company. So I will introduce our speakers in just one moment. But first, let me say a word about belonging and about long bridges. So as we have been discussing for the past 3 days, creating societies where everyone belongs and is recognized as such, where we understand one another as part of a bigger we, requires actively working to reduce divisiveness. And it requires actively working to create spaces where we can disagree with one another in healthy ways, respecting our differences and celebrating our shared humanity. In other words, making belonging possible requires that we create bridges between groups and that we create spaces for conversations. Now, some of those bridges are easier to create than others. Some of those bridges, well, are shorter bridges, if you will. They bring together communities that have multiple affinities and that overall may already see one another as potential allies. But other bridges are much longer and they're harder to build because they require that we reach out to those sitting seemingly far away from us, those we disagree with, and those we tend to see as the others. And this is the topic of this panel. How can those long bridges be built, and why is it important that we build them? I want to begin by thanking Olivia Araiza and El Sadiq El Sheikh for imagining this panel, and then also for making it happen by bringing together our fantastic speakers today. And our fantastic speakers engage daily in the work of long bridging. So let me introduce them briefly. So first, and sitting on the other side here is DeAngelo Bester, who is the executive director of the Workers' Center for Racial Justice in Chicago, which is a grassroots organization fighting for Black liberation and a fair and inclusive society for all people. The WCRJ fights for racial justice by promoting dignity in work, demanding better childcare, and fighting for the end of mass incarceration. And part of the work of the WCRJ is to bridge across Black, non-Black, progressive, and not so progressive communities. Next, we have Dr. Bob Roberts Jr., a self-described bridge builder who is a pastor who has been leading the Northwood Church near Dallas, Texas for over 30 years. He's a co-founder of the Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, an organization which brings together pastors, imams, and rabbis from cities across the United States to foster religious freedom through intentional cross-cultural interventions. Currently, there's over 180 congregations involved in this network, representing almost 500,000 people. Next, we have Myriam Méndez Montalvo, who has devoted her career to promoting civic dialogue and the very hard process of peace building in Colombia. She currently leads Valientes Dialogar, which means it's brave or courageous to dialogue, to talk to one another. A platform established in 2021 which brings together former adversaries from guerrilla factions, members of the military, community leaders, victims and political representatives, among others, to have those very hard conversations. And last but not least, sitting next to me is Omar Salha, a cultural diplomat, that's how he self-describes, who founded and leads the Ramadan Tent Project in the United Kingdom. The Ramadan Tent Project invites people of all faiths, and also those who are not religious, to come together in public spaces to share an iftar meal, which is the fast-breaking meal for Muslims during Ramadan. And so far, the Ramadan Tent Project has organized iftar meals in more than 20 cities in the United Kingdom and 4 continents, serving more than 300,000 meals. So welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, let's get into this conversation. So I wanted to begin by having each one of you briefly describe the journey that led you to engage in this work of long bridging. Was there perhaps a moment or an experience that made you decide that doing the work of long bridging and reach out to such seemingly or perhaps truly uncomfortable allies was what you had to do next? And I'll start with you, Omar. How did the Ramadan Tent Project came to be?
Thank you, Yuna. First of all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So Islamic greetings of peace and blessings be upon you all. I'd like to extend my deep gratitude and appreciation to the Othering and Belonging Institute, staff, and volunteers. We just held our first Ramadan festival a couple of weeks ago. So it spanned over a course of 2 months. I very much am aware of the very intense work that goes behind organizing such events. And so I fully appreciate you, and I want to give you all a massive round of applause for making this happen. It's great to be back in the Bay Area. This is my 6th time. So it's also the first time since COVID. My 2nd time with the conference, first time in 2019, not too far down from here. But it's better to be in this space. I think when I was told the story around the rich history here, it gives a real sense of the work that we're all trying to do. And for me, my inspiration behind Ramadan Tent Project is, for those who've been to Muslim majority countries, you'll experience Ramadan in a very different light. You'll see people out in public towns and squares, bazaars, souks, until the early hours of the morning, people preparing for the month of Ramadan. And the month of Ramadan is the holiest month in the Islamic calendar. It's a very, very important month, which in many ways, Muslims will say it's a month of belonging. It's a month where we sacrifice, yes, food and drink, but also it's a month of spiritual sustenance. It's a month we seek where we belong and to whom we belong. And it's in many ways a disruptor in our lives. And deliberately so, a disruptor in the sense that it affects your eating habits, it affects your sleeping patterns, it affects the way you socialize, the way you work. And that is really an integral part of us understanding where are we deep-rooted? To whom do we belong, and where are we? In the Holy Quran, Allah says, with every hardship, there is ease. And also, whenever you're faced with a calamity, it's a reminder that you belong to Allah, God, and to Him you shall return. And I found that the past 3 days, a lot of the work looking into belonging and where is it that we belong, and I think a lot of it is the power that we all have inside of us, that we carry that with us. Our sense of belonging, in many ways, if you look at the Arabic word of belonging, any linguists out here? Arabic word for belonging? Intima, correct. So intima, the root word of intima is nama. And the definition of nama in Arabic is growth, to grow. So therefore, perhaps our understanding of belonging is not to a specific city, town, state, nation, or geographic or family members, but actually it's our understanding that belonging is forever evolving. Belonging is forever growing. And for me personally, for sure, after this conference, I'm walking away with increased sense of growth and an expansive we that we talk about in terms of the definition of belonging. And so in the UK, often Ramadan is observed in mosques, in community centers, but there wasn't much work being done to bring Ramadan out into the open. How can we bring Ramadan out into the open and bring others to join in and experience the beauty of Ramadan and the fast breaking? Food is a great connector, and it's a great mediator. It's a great tool to bring communities together. Our mission is to bring communities together, to soften hearts and minds, because a tool of othering is hardening hearts and minds, but a tool of belonging is softening hearts and minds. And with every hardship there is ease, with every breaking there is bridging, and with every othering there is also belonging. And so we've been able to pull this event together in a backdrop of, in the UK, a really depressing fact and stat is 2/3 of UK adults believe that Islam is incompatible with British values. Despite the fact that over 90% of British Muslims say they have a sense of belonging to the UK. Why is there a communication gap here? Is it fear? Is it the lack of the fact that they've been to a mosque? Over 70% of UK adults have not been to a mosque. And alarmingly, over half of the population, UK adults, have not been to a church. So you actually think about the root problem here. How can we address that? And so about long bridging and about how we can establish areas of compassion, understanding, of love, of no judgment, is what is familiar to you and I. And I think it was day one we talked about symbols of important buildings and structures that we can resonate with. And it was referenced in the sense that, let's say some of us here are sports fans, some of you here love literature and love the arts. Well, can we reimagine this space with having a large iftar meal, bringing communities together? You know, I always look back and think, it's been 11 years, so it's a third of my life, over a third of my life dedicated to this. And I always think about when the penny drops, it's incredible to see the generations, first generation to fifth generation. And the fifth generation, now it is the norm for those young kids to attend a museum and have an iftar with 500 people from all walks of life. Whereas the first generation challenge was around, is there a space for me to pray? Or is there halal food? Or which way is the Qibla? Where now actually the challenges or the opportunities are far different. And so it's great to see that the cultural shift we're seeing in the mindset towards Islam. It will be interesting to ask again whether UK adults still feel Islam is incompatible with British values. You know, this research study was done in 2011. To see that now change, hopefully we see less and less. But I think long bridging in the fact here, there is an important tool for us to look at the backdrop, the scene setting. How can we think strategically about short bridging and long bridging, but also inviting others to come in as well? And it's really important to point the fact that in our ability to showcase our true belonging. What I mean by that, be as authentic as possible with who you are. Bring your whole version, the good, the bad, and ugly. Bring everything, because that's who you are. And once you do that, you have real human connections and real stories and conversations.
Thank you. So Myriam, I'll continue with you, speaking about bringing kind of like the hard things into the conversation. Could you tell us a little bit about how Valientes Dialogar came to be?
Thank you, Yuna, and I also want to express my deep and joyous gratitude for being here in this stage, in this place where we belong, this place that makes possible everything that we're talking about and aspiring to. So great thanks to the OBI Institute, to those who made it possible for me to be here, to Ashlyn, to Elsadig, to Olivia, to Nilo, to Tanya, to Josh, that I had the pleasure of meeting in Colombia earlier this year. I love the first question that you sent us in preparation of this panel, and it made me think of, was there a moment, was there a point that made me do what I do? And I love the word journey that was in that question, because indeed it is a journey. And there are many moments. But in my case, there was an inflection point. There was one situation that made me really take this at a different level. And we've been hearing about the UK, and let me take you to Colombia. Not all Encanto, but also not all Narcos. And Colombia, for those unfamiliar with my country, in 2012 started a peace process between the government of Colombia and the FARC, the longest and largest insurgency in the Western Hemisphere. And let me just offer some of the paradoxes that help us understand a little bit this place where I was so fortunate to be born. The first paradox: we have one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, a 30-year-old plus constitution, that in terms of values and rights that it upholds for everyone and everywhere in the territory is an example, studied largely by academics inside and outside Colombia. And yet, we are the third most unequal country in the world after South Africa and Namibia. So in fact, there's not one Colombia. There are many Colombians. There's urban Colombia, there's rural Colombia, there's peripheral Colombia, where large segments of peoples, especially Afro-descendants, Afro-Colombian, indigenous, live at the margins of every opportunity that the development process, politically, economically, socially, offers to those in other areas. The second paradox that I'd like to offer, so you understand the context in which I came to do this work, is we are the oldest democracy in the region. In Latin America, almost 200 years of uninterrupted democratic government, and yet, for the last 6 decades, we have lived with the highest levels of violence of that region, an armed conflict and an internal conflict with a number of insurgencies and actors and armed groups that have defined pretty much the public debate and the life of the people in my country. Just so that you have an idea, 9 million of victims, almost 20% of our population, or to put it in US, something closer to here, the total size of Chicago, DeAngelo. This is the level of violence. So in 2016, the government of Colombia reaches a final agreement with the FARC after 4 years of negotiation. And once it reaches the agreement, it puts it to a vote to the population so that they will have a say on it, to a referendum. And in spite of this violence, in spite of this exclusion, in spite of all these inequalities that the agreement also wanted to address, not just the disarmament and reintegration of the combatants, the insurgents of the FARC, the people vote no. And the no wins by less than 0.5% and 37% turnout. And the aspiration of peace that you would think, who would not be for peace? How would peace not be a national purpose? Divides the country in two, because no side can claim a clear mandate or a victory. We're fractured. I was then in Colombia after 2.5 decades of working internationally. I was working with the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace that was leading the negotiations, and the result was sobering. And I really had to think for myself, is there something? What is the task? What is the work that needs to be done here? And I'll leave the rest for the follow-up questions so we can hear the other members of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Pastor Bob, let me go to you now.
So I want to, right up front, thank Dr. Powell for inviting me to this event. I'm a Baptist pastor from Texas. Don't kill me. I am an evangelical. I'm just happy, and I'm not political, and I love everybody. And listen, I speak at universities, the World Economic Forum. I speak all over the place around the world, speak in more mosques than I do church. I'm more nervous to talk to you guys than I am any crowd I've ever spoke to. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I'm probably going to say something wrong. Don't other me. Just be patient. I'm doing my best. When my friends heard I was coming, they said, Bob, why are you doing this? I said, I don't know, but I know this. It's probably the only time a Baptist pastor's ever been invited. I'm going. So I'm here. And I'm here to bridge with you. And I also want to say this. Evangelicals can kind of be angry people. I'm sorry about that. They need to repent. You matter to me. I don't care what your political party is, about to get in trouble, what your sexual orientation is. I don't have to agree with you to love you, care about you. I promise you Jesus does. I want to follow him. I want you to know you matter. So why did I start working with Muslims? It's a long story. Here's a short version. As an evangelical, we have the most negative views of Muslims in the world. I want the whole world to love Jesus and have a positive view. I want to baptize all of you. I mean, that would be my dream. I know that ain't happening, but it's what I want to do. So here's what I got to thinking. We have the most negative view of Muslims. That's bad. It's bad for Muslims. It's bad for my faith. Jesus said, love your enemies. I mean, everybody's included in there. So if that's the case, how could I shift how evangelicals felt about Muslims? And so I was friends with this guy named Prince Turki Al-Faisal, and he challenged me. He said, Bob, you need to do something about how Christians, evangelicals see Muslims. I said, Your Highness, in America. I said, Your Highness, that'd be like you starting a Baptist Sunday school class in Mecca. Wouldn't go over real big. He said, all the reason more why you need to do it. So the plane landed, DFW airport. There's a mosque on the corner of the airport. So I went to that mosque and went in, told the guy's a Baptist pastor, the imam, scared him to death. It'd be like a Muslim extremist showing up at my church saying howdy. And so I just explained to him, I said, look, I'm sorry for the tension we've caused. I want to build a bridge. So we figured out to have this big old barbecue thing in Texas. So we got beef halal ribs, couldn't get pork. And we had a special guy came in, and we expected a couple of hundred Muslims show up. Over 2,000 showed up. So I can tell you how to grow a mega church. I can also tell you how to shrink it overnight. And that's what we did. And so they started calling us the Muslim church. I didn't like that. And so me and this guy named Imam Majid, he's one of my best friends. We're about to be together next week. We're building a base in Ghana so we can work in Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso. So we go to the tough places. And I was born in Texas. That's one of the tough places. And so we concluded, how could we help people, pastors and imams, so it gets to the masses? Our goal is not dialogue. I get bored with interfaith dialogue, everybody talking. How could we change how people felt with one another at the grassroots? So that's what we did. And so we had this retreat. The first one, we picked 12 of the most influential pastors from 12 of the major cities with 12 of the most influential imams. And we took them to a dude ranch in Texas. And so we go there. At first, nobody would talk to one another. You know, the imams were with one another, the pastors with one another. But by the end of the week, they were hugging one another. The pastors made me promise no pictures, don't tell anyone I was here. The imams did the same thing. And so we went hunting, fishing, skeet shooting. I mean, it was incredible. And we got arguments with one another. No lectures. To this day, no lectures. All we do is just build bridges, and we'll be doing it next week in Ghana and some other places. And so we wind up becoming close friends. And so we put this little process together, and it's grown to like 20 cities in the U.S., 12 countries. We go to places like Qatar. I love Qatar. I know Qatar is getting a bad rap these days. Can you imagine what the world would be like without Qatar right now? I'm grateful for Qatar. And that's where all the bad people can come. We've got to have a place to talk. If we can't talk, if we can't get together, nothing is going to be resolved. So we go to places like Qatar and all these other places for one reason. We want to get to know one another. And we have 5 things you have to do, and it's been transformative. So that's what we do.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, DeAngelo, could you tell us a little bit about the work you do and how you came to do it?
Yeah, sure. So unlike my esteemed panelists, I'm not going to thank the OBI staff for living El Sadiq and John. I'm not going to curse them, but I've been doing a lot of work since I've been here, but I love these guys, and anything that they need, I'm happy to be a part of. And so also want to say that I'm probably the only heathen up here, so I think that's why they put me next to Pastor Bob. He said he wants to convert folks, baptize people, so I think that's why they sat me next to Pastor Bob.
Amen.
So how I got into this work was real simple. So over the past few years, just kind of it wasn't like one particular moment. It's been several moments, really doing some reflection about our movement in terms of organizing and civic engagement, and that just reflect on the fact that we haven't really been talking to enough people. We talk to ourselves, we talk amongst ourselves, but that is about it. We do not talk to enough people, at least for our experiences, in order to achieve some of the goals we want in terms of creating a society where everyone belongs. Also reflect on the fact that more and more people in this country believe in that democracy isn't really necessary, and that it's okay to commit violence in order to achieve your political goals. And so just coming to the realization that our side, and again, this is still me kind of othering folks, but our side has to win every single election in order to win. And then what happens when we don't win? As we saw in 2016, we're still living with the consequences of when we don't win. And so that's how I kind of came to the realization that we really do need to begin talking to more people. And I really do have to thank John Powell about this. I've known him for 20 years. I love him, but he's also irritating because he constantly pushes me to think broader than what I do. Push me to think more and deeper about how we organize, how we do civic engagement. Basically said, if we're going to really create a society where everyone belongs, can we just talk to our people? Like, our organization runs the largest Black civic engagement program in the Midwest. I'll put our numbers up against the Democratic Party any day of the week. But is talking to a bunch of Black folks, is that enough to save our democracy, to preserve our society. And more importantly, is just talking to the people who we're comfortable talking to, is that enough to create a society where everyone belongs? And, you know, past few years, I said, it's not enough. And so that's how I kind of came to this realization in the work that we do in terms of doing long bridging.
Thank you. And I do want to, at some point, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about whether, you know, long bridges are something that is necessary for the work that you do, or if you think that it's sort of good but not crucial. But before I go there, I want to ask you a little bit of I think it's a little bit of a hard question, but I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about the risks or perhaps the apprehensions that you had when you started engaging in this work of long bridging. And I want to ask you if the risks and the apprehensions, I mean, did your fears materialize, or did you actually encounter other obstacles that you had not anticipated? And Myriam, I wanted to start with you in this question, because in your case, you know, you're engaging in long bridging in a context that comes from a lot of violence, and so it seems like there are a lot of risks in engaging in this work.
Thank you. So I left you guys in 2016, so let me move forward to 2018. A new presidential election in Colombia, and the government the political party that wins the presidency is the same of the political coalition that had won the referendum. They come into power with the promise of tearing apart the agreement. It's 1.5 years after the agreement has been signed. There's a lot of former insurgents that have already demobilized. They have handed down their arms, more than 10,000. So you get an idea of the sheer size of this process. And the country was really entering into like a really high fever of division and polarization. And I was then working for an institution that it's the Inspector Attorney General of Colombia, a very typical, a typical institution for those of you not familiar with Colombia, that basically defends the public interest and protects human rights. And we were very worried, because while there was a lot of hope by a large part of the population, you know, on the possibilities to actually live in peace without killing each other that the agreement brought, the opposition that was now in power, they actually felt that the agreement gave impunity to the high commanders of the FARC, and that it also gave them free passage to political participation in Congress. And so we were thinking, what are we going to do? And we did something kind of like similar to what Pastor Bob is doing. We thought we need to bring these leaders to the table. And we decided that it would be a table of 4 types of leaderships. The business sector, and we invited pretty much 80% of the GDP of the country. The political sector, every political party who had representation in Congress, we invited the presidents of those political parties. We invited the social movements, unions, students, indigenous, ethnic communities, women, to come to the table. Those same movements that years later would mobilize and almost put a halt to the country. That's the level of representation that was there. And we also brought the institutional leaders, the president, the vice president, and cabinet ministers. And just on the tactics about this, since you shared some of them with us, we told them we were going to bring them together for what we called or baptized a social dialogue summit. And we told them we're inviting these leaders, but we never told them who they were going to be. Because we knew, like you, that if we said the numbers, the names, that they would immediately say no. And we also made very explicit, we were not bringing them to convince them about the peace agreement. We already knew that had fractured a political debate and discussion in Colombia. We brought them with the crazy idea to explore that maybe there was something that we could agree on. a very basic idea for a society that wants to exist, which is that we do not need to fall in another cycle of violence to be able, to transform Colombia, that we have to reject violence. And up to the very last minute, we had all sorts of complications. There were people calling from planes that they were, we just heard that this person is there, we're not going to go. We overcame those obstacles. And just let me take you with an example of what happened. There were 80 leaders. We convened them in an hacienda, far as possible from the media. It was a confidential meeting. And there were 400 members of their security apparatus to protect them. And we had a problem because we had food for 80 people. We didn't have food for 400 additionals, but give a Colombian a problem, and I think we'll find a creative idea. So we managed to overcome it, and this is how this process of social dialogue happened. Let me just conclude with this. This was being done by a public institution, and we had 4 years of our term in office, and that term came to an end, like it happens in democracy. That's a good thing, right? And we, of course, were with the big question mark whether this would be able to continue once there was a transition in leadership. But I'll tell you more about this when I get my other opportunity. Thank you, Yuna.
Thank you.
I just want to say that if Pastor Bob would have been there, I would have invited you.
All right. DeAngelo, I wanted to go to you next. Could you talk a little bit about any risks or apprehensions that you encountered or that you felt, and whether actually, did you in fact encounter those fears or not?
Yeah, so obviously there's risk and apprehensions going into this work. I would say the biggest risk was just the fact that we have limited resources. I run a small nonprofit Black liberation organization. We're a social justice group. So raise your hand if you're an organizer in here. All right, well, I'm sorry for you because I know how much you guys get paid. Raise your hand if you're an executive director in here. I'm really sorry for you guys because you have to raise the money. So for every dollar that we raise, we have to really be strategic about how it's spent. And so if we raise $5,000, do we want to spend that money trying to engage our base of people and build our membership base, build our power, or do we want to do the long bridging work? So that was the biggest kind of apprehension that we had going into this was, do we spend our limited, not just money, but actually time? Do we spend our limited resources trying to do this? And the other big risk and apprehension that I had going into this was, what does it look like to send a bunch of formerly incarcerated Black folks to knock on doors in rural, conservative, white MAGA communities? And again, we've had the police called on us. We've had people threaten to shoot us. It's a real risk. So what we decided to do was begin to pair our traditional inclusive democracy team, which is our year-round canvas that we have, and identify people from those communities who can go out and do the Long Bridge canvassing with us. Because we wanted to make sure there were some Black people on the doors, because that's that first step in bridging. But we also wanted to make sure that people were safe. So that's what we've been doing. I would say another big apprehension that we have that has nothing to do with like doing long bridge work with folks in white rural conservative areas is the long bridging work that we're hoping to do in Chicago with our partners at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights around addressing the migrant crisis in Chicago. I've heard so many kind of anti-immigrant sentiments come out of Black folks' mouths in Chicago since the migrants have been coming up here. They're bringing crime, they're bringing disease, they're taking up all our resources, they're taking up jobs. The same stuff that they used to say about black people when we migrated up from the South to the North. And so while I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we have in Wisconsin, the real conversations that I think may give us the most difficulty and most trouble will be the conversations we have with our own people about some of the, both the anti-black and anti-immigrant sentiment that exists in our communities.
Thank you. I realized I was way too ambitious when I drafted all the questions that I wanted to ask. But let me go to you, Pastor Bob, to talk a little bit about the risks or apprehensions you might have had. And you've done long bridging not only towards other faiths, but also perhaps within your own community. So I wanted to ask you if you could speak a little bit about that.
You bet. I felt at risk when I came here. My name tag said Pastor Bob Roberts, and I just thought, I don't know they need to put pastor on that, but somebody was trying to include me, so I'm grateful for that. I think that, you know, I was afraid of the other. I was afraid of the person that was opposite from me. I discovered the biggest challenge I had was my own. I'm going to use this word. I know y'all use it different. I'm trying to figure out what you guys mean by it, but it was my own tribe. I mean, the biggest challenge I had was, I thought it would be the Muslims or someone. It wasn't. It was the people of my own tribe that were saying, what are you doing? You're normalizing Muslims, and people are going to think they're nice people, and you can't do that. You know, I mean, what are you doing? And I think what I had to learn was the biggest price that you had to pay was that of being a prophetic person. You know, I'm Baptist. We want to grow our churches, evangelical. Big is better. But we don't always challenge our churches to say, hey, what is this church? We took the same philosophy, and I can talk about this now, but only in the last 2 or 3 weeks. PBS is going to be doing a news report on this week. At one of the churches we're working with, we took the same philosophy and we applied it to black and white pastors. I hate to say this, but the whole racial thing started from white Christians like me in the white Christian church hundreds of years ago. We started it. And repentance is not just saying, I'm sorry, that's bad. I'm talking to you theologically. Repentance means you're going one way, you need to go the other way. Repentance is saying, now what are we going to do to fix this mess? Martin Luther King, what he did was he challenged it as a black minority Baptist pastor. I'm challenging it as a white majority Baptist pastor. He did what he did for the sake of his people. I'm doing what I'm doing for the sake of the gospel because we've polluted it and we've not made it look right. And so what we did was we got black and white pastors together, and we've been following the same exact thing. And next week there's going to be Baptist, black and white pastors. Because here's the thing, white evangelicals generally vote Republican. And they're not going to hell for that. And black evangelical pastors generally vote Democrat. And they're not going to hell for that. But both sides say, how can you be a Christian and vote for that other person? I'll let God figure that out. Here's what I know. We've got to deal with that as Christians and say, we're the ones who did the offending. What does repentance look like? And so it's scary. So we have these 5 mentors, and this lady, I'll call her by name, Barbara Skinner Williams. She said, Bob, she's African American. She's 80. She helped form the Black Caucus. She said, you're doing the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. And she's right. And it has been hard. And it's not been easy. But here's the question. If we're all created in the image of God, why don't we treat one another like that? I mean, especially if we're Christians. But here's what else I would say. You and I, Omar, we have irreconcilable theological differences. Our theology is antithetical. It's irreconcilable. What you believe about Jesus, what I believe about Jesus. But if I really believe what the Bible says and we're created in the image of God, does my faith bring any value to people outside my faith? And if it doesn't, then I think there's a right to ask the question, is it a legitimate faith? But it does. Because if I follow the teachings of Jesus, I've got to be at peace with everybody. That means Muslims, LGBTQ, Buddhists, and on occasion Methodists. We've got to be willing. We've got to be willing to say, you know what? I'm going to speak prophetic to my own tribe, even if it cost me, because there's a big we in this room, not because sociology has discovered it, but because God created it. So I've got to be at the core of that conversation.
Thank you. Omar, tell us a little bit about your risks or apprehensions.
Well, first of all, I'd like to begin by saying, Bob, you would be absolutely welcome at our event in London, in the UK. So I'm extending an invitation for you to come and join us next Ramadan.
Get the baptistry ready.
That's the long bridge. Okay? Right, so risks, plenty of risks. Actually, a lot that Bob is mentioning resonates a lot. When you're working within faith communities, often there isn't the nuance that you need. Often there's inter-conflicts and intra-conflicts as well. How can I convince my community that there is the long game as well as the short game? How can I show them that because we've been othered so much, we cannot imagine a world of belonging? And so, at times, I look at this example, powerful example, and I want to bring it back to what Bob was mentioning about different faith communities and dialogue. You know, for me, values are integral, because just like you and like all of us here, we're not agree on everything. And just like every single one of us in this hall and of the conference over the past 3 days, we will not agree on everything, but that's okay. How can we accept that we will have different opinions, different perspectives, different theologies that we follow, yet value our shared humanity? That's the most important thing. We are all born free, but it's the structures that enslave us. It's maybe the world, the city, the country we live in gives us the advantage or disadvantage. I refrain from using the word underrepresented groups. Often in some sectors we are overrepresented. It's actually, are we appreciated or not? We need to think about that. At the time of Prophet Muhammad, in the early Islamic history, just this example to share, to showcase the shared humanity. He was persecuted by his own tribe, by his own people in Mecca. But he sought a migration to where? To Abyssinia, current day Eritrea and Ethiopia. King Nagashi, who was a Christian. He said, go there because I have heard of this king. He is just, he is fair. And so he sent an order for a group of migrants from Mecca to go to Abyssinia. And when they arrived, they said, our prophet told us to come to you for protection because we heard that you are just, you are fair. And we also have a shared commonality with the Virgin Mary and Jesus. And he said, tell me what you know of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. And narrated verses from the Quran. And then after hearing those verses, he said, your story and our story, the source is the same light. And this is the power of the conference. And today, thinking about belonging, if we can think of belonging as the source of all the lights that we have, and we're all shining our lights to the world, in different shades of light, some very bright, some just twinkling, but we're all sharing that source of belonging. And so in our journey, yes, several risks and several apprehensions. We've gone out to the northeast of England, which voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, for instance. We have to think of our volunteers, who unfortunately, the biggest victims of hate crime against Muslims are our sisters. Gender, race, and of course, visibly Muslim with wearing the hijab. And so our volunteers, when they go home, for example, it's a question that I have to think about. It's a responsibility I bear to think the safety of our volunteers in this climate. Should we even go ahead with this festival? Should we even put on these open iftar events, hosting thousands, tens of thousands of people? And I remember to this day, we had a rabbi we invited down at one of our open iftar events. Came down, we spoke about, it's Ramadan, let's talk about fasting, Yom Kippur, the significance of Yom Kippur, fasting on this day, and also fasting in Ramadan, the Day of Atonement, and us seeking repentance in Ramadan. And then when it came to iftar time, one of the volunteers presented him with a kosher meal. And he was absolutely in shock. He was like, I did not expect this. I just brought with me my apple, and I was going to have my apple and be on my way afterwards. But I was like, hold on a second. If you came to my home, I need to, hospitality, Eastern hospitality, we know about this. It's very important to ensure that you are welcome. We're treating you as a king and queen in our home. We can't have you come in and bring your own meal and eat at us and then leave. Absolutely not. And so that stuck with until this day. That simple, small gesture. And it goes back to co-creating spaces of belonging. That how can I not only and make sure that there's the iftar event, everything is secure. Hold on a second, there's a group from this so-and-so church is coming. There's a group who are non-Muslim. There's a group who are, non-religious at all. Let's sit down with them, let's engage and discuss. And that co-creation of spaces of belonging is a form of long bridging, which goes to showcase that, listen, it's okay not to agree on everything. No one's trying to shove an agenda down your throat or anything like that. Let's live peacefully beside one another and think of where are we going, what sort of space and society we want to inherit, and ensure that we can all feel that safety in being authentically ourselves. Yes, some of those conversations behind closed doors are important, are more powerful, where you can literally, take the gloves off, as they say. But also publicly, it's strikingly positive to see thousands come together. And, our open iftar events, I can speak about this forever, but honestly, words don't do the service to the work that our team does. Just search Open Iftar UK and look at the images. Everyone sits on the ground. Whether you're a chief exec of an investment bank, whether you're a janitor, whether you're a school teacher, whether you are a student, everyone's treated with equity. And we're grounded, sat on the ground with purpose. You're facing each other. The meal that is given out, you're passing the parcel to your neighbor. And the motto is turning strangers into friends. So yes, there are the risks, but it's worth it. Because honestly, when you get on the other side of fear, it's belonging, it's success, it's hope. And I would say the word for hope is amal. Please find your amal during this conference. Find your hope and cling on to it, because that's what's going to keep us going.
And I think that one of the wonderful things about this conversation is precisely that it opens up spaces for hope, and it suggests ways in which people can do the work of long bridging that they might be very anguished about, or that they think is actually something that cannot be done. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. And so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask you very briefly, each one of you, to speak to one of two questions. So the first one sort of comes from something, DeAngelo, that you said, which is that there's few resources. Resources are scarce. So why privilege long bridging? And there are so many other things to do. Do you think that long bridging is something that is essential to what you do, or do you think that it's something that, is sort of nice? but not quite core. So that's one of the questions that you can answer, or just tell me something that surprised you from this process and the work that you have been doing. And Pastor Bob, I'll start with you.
So I would say it is tough. I mean, raising money to do what we do is very difficult. We're being invited to do it all over the world. If I had a plan to convert you all, I could get millions for that. But to get along with you, nobody's going to give me a dime in my tribe for that. So it's tough, and it's not easy, but it's worth it. And here is why it's worth it. It's worth it because what you're doing is you're building a relationship with someone, and that matters. And see, it can take a year or two to destroy civil society, but it takes 40 years to build it up. And so if we don't have people that are looking for the long view, some of you are worried about November. I am too. I'm worried about November a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years out. Everything that we're doing now, we don't need to do for November. We need to do for November or August 2035 or 2040. If you don't have the long view, you're not going to bring any value to what's going on right now, because I'm telling you, we're going to go through a tough time. We're in it. I'm optimistic. Just because everything potentially is going to work out good does not mean we should not expect things to be easy, which means our character, our integrity, our endurance has to be deep and solid, or we will not make it for the long haul. That's how change comes. And so it's worth it. I'll just share with you one story and then I'm done. Majid and I work together all over the world. Majid's Sudanese American, big guy. I love him with all my heart. And so we were in Sudan right before everything blew up. And we did a phenomenal event there with the pastors and the imams. He took me to where his father, who was the Grand Mufti of Sudan, is buried, and where his grandfather is buried. And I was with all of his family, and I know his family in D.C. And so he asked me, he said, Bob, he was coming to Dallas for something. He said, I want to meet your dad. I love my father. He's almost 90. My dad's a Baptist preacher, doesn't always know what I do. He has no clue I'm here. Thank God he's not good at technology. And I love my father with all my heart, and I'm not much better with technology. I'm 66. What do you expect? But my dad, you know, Majid wanted to meet my dad. So that means I had to go from Dallas to Deep East Texas. And I didn't know how my dad would respond. Bob, what are you doing with all these Muslims? You know, I mean, what's going on, son? I don't see you preaching revival meetings with them and stuff. And I try his best. So I called him on the phone and said, Dad, my buddy Majid's here. Would you like to meet him? Well, you know, why? I said, well, I just thought you might want to meet him. And he said, well, look, you can bring him by, but just 3 minutes. He'd been ill. He'd been in the hospital, and that's it. So I take Majid to meet my dad. I go in where my dad is before Majid comes in, and he says, now, Bobby Jean, I'm from East Texas. He said, Bobby Jean, just 3 minutes, and then that's it. So I said, all right. So Majid comes into the room, and he immediately shakes my dad's hand and says, you must be a great man to have the son that you have. And boy, that was good. Thank you, Majid. And so then Majid begins to say, look, I've come to value Christians and your son. And I just want, and my dad was moved by that. So my dad quoting him a verse from the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament. And so Majid began to talk about that verse, and they started talking. But I know my dad, and it was now 4 minutes. I said, Majid, we got to go. And so my dad kept talking about a verse. Finally, at 6 minutes, I said, Majid, we got to go. And my dad said, slow down, son. We're trying to have a conversation. And so Majid and I leave, and he calls me, and I'm on my car phone, so Majid can hear everything. My dad goes, Bobby may not be a Christian, but I'm telling you, there's something special about that man. You need to love him. You need to become his friend. And I said, all right, Dad, I'll do it. That's long bridging. It's doing stuff for the long haul. I never thought in my dad's life he would ever affirm that. He did. We've got to be in it for the long haul. We'll make it.
Omar, last words.
I would say there's a lovely African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I really hope that we will all go together, despite how long the journey is, despite how long bridging is tough, and that sometimes it's unsustainable. We have to think about funding, we have to think about firefighting, as well as addressing the very issues right in front of us, but also thinking about the society we want to give over to the next generation as well. And so it's really important that sometimes it's okay to pause, reflect with grace, with humility, to understand I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing and prepared to listen, to understand, and doing so genuinely, authentically, with no judgment whatsoever. We may have strong convictions, and they are important. We may feel very strongly about our purpose in life, and that's also very important. But what is it that we're doing in terms of bringing the community together and moving together, not going alone? How can we empower the collective, the we? How can we empower the collective and move together? I want to finish off with this quote from the late, great Muhammad Ali, which is something that I personally resonate with a lot, but also as an organization, something I often tell our team and volunteers. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. Service, servant leadership, is an integral part of a mechanism for belonging. How can I serve? Put all my ego aside. Put all of our egos, at the gates, at the doors before we come into here. I always say this to our team. Irrespective of who you think you are or what job you have or how much you're earning, put all that on the side, because you're here to serve. You're here to give out food. You're here to ask, do you need anything more? You're here to sweep the floor. You're here to serve, because that's the only way we can empower and create and co-create that space of belonging for everyone. And so despite the difficulties in this world, despite the pessimism that we see, despite the negativity, always remember that othering versus belonging, othering is pessimism. Othering is fear. Belonging is optimism, is feeling good, feeling that sense of hope, knowing that we're going to make it through. And a beautiful metaphor, I'm very sorry, I came from England. I brought with me the London weather for day 1 and day 2. But I also felt that was a reflection of a lot of the heaviness that we held in our hearts and our minds. And on day 3, the last day of the conference, it's great to see that lovely sunshine come out. And that's genuinely, I feel, a metaphor that we end on a day full of optimism. And let's take this energy to work together. Thank you.
I'm sort of borrowing time a little bit, but Myriam, any last words, and then I'll go to you, DeAngelo.
Oh, okay. I thought you had asked DeAngelo before, so if you want to go first. So I left you with, this limitation of whether this process would continue because of the changing leadership. And of course, the new leadership of that institution said no. They didn't want to continue it. And to answer your question, is it important to do long bridging? Absolutely. It's the 101 if we are going to save ourselves, and more than heavily saving. And what happened was that this group of people, 50 of them that had been in this creation of this long bridging, realized that this was so important that they could not let it stop that process of building just because an institution didn't want to carry it forward, and understood that it was their responsibility to do it themselves. And this is how Valiente es Dialogar, Brave to Dialogue, came about. A group of citizens from all walks of life. You describe them: former combatants, religious leaders, women, students, journalists, artists, former cabinet members, police members, etc. Very diverse group that have very opposing views on society, meet on a regular basis to discuss very difficult issues, like, rural development in Colombia, illicit economies. And in the process, there's a lot of things that we've learned, but let me just share a few. One, it is, of course, about having the difficult conversations, but it is about creating the conditions so those conversations can happen. This just doesn't happen spontaneously because we're lucky. You need to be intentional about it. It requires, yes, resources, but it requires will. And the will is not only of the mind, it's also of the heart. It requires understanding and awareness that this is value. We've learned that these processes not only help us humanize the other, but they help us shed the masks that we put on another. Those masks that we immediately assign to people because of the way they look, who they hang around with, and all these preconceived notions. And by taking these masks, we start to see the person behind those preconceived notions. And we also have learned, because the world has so many present, urgent problems that sometimes we feel powerless, in the face of all that adversity. But we've also learned and worked with the concept of the square meter. We use meters in Colombia. Each one of us has a square meter, and it doesn't matter the size of that square meter. It looks different for everybody, right? Just start there, and then from there, start building it with others. And the we that we create, it's not only the we of the minds, it's not only the we of the hearts, it's the we of the difference. We have learned to agree that we disagree. And in spite of that disagreement, the we exists. And let me finalize with this. Yesterday, John Powell talked about a conversation with a pastor that asked him if the bridges should be as long so that they would reach the evil. And I've been thinking about that since yesterday. And if by evil we mean the other, and if by hell we mean that place where the other exists, I say, hell yes, let's build that bridge.
DeAngelo.
So it's absolutely necessary. If anyone has ever seen that Hulu movie, The Handmaid's Tale, the TV show, there's a scene where the protagonist, June, is running through the forest with her family trying to escape Gilead. I do not want that to be me and my family. And so we have to continue doing the long bridging. For me, it's a very straight line. Long bridging helps halt othering. Long bridging helps lead to building a bigger we. Building a bigger we helps us create a society where everyone belongs. We have to do it. That has to be our work.
So we're out of time, but I wanted to thank you for being here and for being so candid in sharing your experiences. And for giving us so much hope at the end of this session about the possibilities of creating a bigger we in which everyone comes to belong. Please join me in thanking our speakers for this great conversation. Thank you.